Hey guys, the Network here. Hope you've been doing well. So, this is going to be my Halloween video where I will be talking about something that I know scares a few people, namely the MikroTik CLI. Now, I'm hoping this video will actually get you unafraid of it because it is an amazing tool that you can use to manage your devices. It's actually very easy to work around with, and I'm just going to share some tips and tricks with you. So, let's get into the video. So let's quickly talk about the different ways that you can get onto the command line. And there are three very popular ways that I'd say. The first being you can actually connect to it through Winbox. So your actual Winbox application, you go in there, you'll see there is a tab or a button that you can press for a terminal. When you press that, window pops out and you are in the command line. So you can actually issue commands from there or do whatever you need to do from the command line, do troubleshooting. It's very useful and it's very accessible. So I actually appreciate that they've baked that into the application as well. Second thing that I can think of that people tend to use is their own, let's say, terminal applications. Maybe it's something like Putty or it could be something like Secure CRT. Depends on whatever your favorite is. Mine is Putty. I love using it. But you can open up this terminal client, use an IP address to connect to the device on a management port. Very important to stress, you need an IP if you're going to be connecting using a terminal client, and then you can manage it that way. And that's typically what I'm going to be using to show throughout the video, but we will do some quick setup stuff after this third point. And the last method that I think people tend to use, even though it's lost a bit of popularity over the years, is using a console cable or a serial cable. So some devices, especially the older network generations, usually have these big serial ports, or there were little console ports as well that you could get. But they were effectively set up for management. So that first time configuration. So stuff like Cisco used it a lot where a switch didn't have an IP yet. How would you configure it? Well, you'd use the console port where you could connect directly over the cable, over that layer 1 to actually get onto the device and then do some basic configuration. So this exists on some MikroTiks, but not many of them have stuff like serial ports. So it's not something that is actively used anymore, but it's definitely something that you can use to get onto the command line interface if your device supports it, to just quickly do some troubleshooting. If you somehow lose access via Winbox and via the normal command line way, then perhaps you can use the serial to get back on the router or the switch and fix things. Alright, so let's connect to our MikroTik using a terminal client. Now I'm just going to base the assumption that you've already have an IP address configured on the MikroTik so that you can connect to it. But what I've done is I've basically set up a bit of a management network where I've configured Ethernet 5 with a specific IP, namely 172.24.0.1/24. I've given my machine a static IP in that range, so that I can just connect to the MikroTik on IP, but there's no other configuration set up. So let's just log on onto 172.24.0.1, and I'm logging into Putty. Let me just max that. So username, password, presto, and here we are in the command line. So now that we're in the command line, there's a few things I just want you to take note of. Firstly, when you log in, your session will show what account you've logged in with, and it will show you the MikroTik's identity, its name, which is quite nice because then you know exactly which device you're working on. Now with MikroTik, you can see there is this arrow here followed by the cursor where you can type commands. Now interesting, MikroTik doesn't have a specific configuration mode that you need to enter to edit specific objects or configurations in the MikroTik. You can run all of the code from the single line and it will be completely valid. So this is why I also stress that you should be careful whenever you're working with something like the command line so you don't make strange mistakes, because that can potentially cause some system disruption. So always make sure you're actually doing what you want to do when you're working on the MikroTik. Now, second big point I want to make. If you press F1, this will give you a nice list of commands that you can run in your current directory. So at the moment we're in the general directory, or let's say the global directory. And from here we can see there is a list of different commands that we can run. Now you'll see there are different color coded commands or objects. So if you see a command being this purple or magenta color, that just means the command is an action, that you're telling the MikroTik to do something. So it's going to do something with that. So it might print a command, or it might import something, or it might do something specifically. Whereas the cyan or bluish objects are namely additional directories or pieces of configuration that you might be wanting to go into. Because let's say maybe you want to configure something with your IP addresses or IPv6 or your routing or your system, or do something with the tools. This is how you can navigate through your MikroTik. Now, what's cool is if we press F1 again, it's actually going to give us another small list of different things that we can use to navigate around our MikroTik, just additional help. Now, this tab is very useful because tab, even though this isn't unique to RouterOS, Cisco, Juniper, most vendors use this, but it's wonderful because it basically, whenever you tab while you're typing, it will give you a list of possible commands to finish what you're busy typing. So let's say if I wanted to do something with the IP addresses, if I type IP and I press tab, it's just going to put that /. Don't worry about the /. If you hit tab again, it will give you the next list of commands. So if I hit tab, now I can see what else I can put in here: address or DNS or IPsec or pool. And also, since I'm in the different directory now, so to speak, even though I haven't changed anything, if I press F1, it will do the same thing as before, but instead of all of the global commands that we've got access to, now we have access to everything in the IP area. Now you can see there's IP firewall, IP hotspot, IPsec, IP neighbor, IP pool, all those wonderful things. So this is just a quick way to navigate around the command line very quickly to see what is happening with the MikroTik. Now I just want to go back to this list of options, or let's just press F1 again, because besides the tab key, there's also the search command history. So if you press F3, you can actually search for commands that you might have issued before, and it will find that command. If you just hit F3, you'll see it will give us, there's like a list of possible things. But what I also want to stress with the history is, if you press the up arrow key on your keyboard, it will actually also navigate to previous commands that has been issued from the MikroTik. Now this can be useful if you want to see what somebody else might have done on the MikroTik. And the same said, if you press down, it will just start going back down the list of past commands. So that's just basically a way of viewing the history. Now, safe mode is if you press F4, you will see it will pop up with this safe message here. And in essence, what that means is if you add configuration with safe mode enabled and you somehow lose connectivity to the router and your session ends, like prematurely, you didn't end it, you didn't log out, then any configuration you made during that session will then just be reverted back to before the safe mode. Now this is very useful for if you're maybe configuring a device remotely and you're scared you might lose access because you're working with something very sensitive. Then if you issue the safe mode, you lose the session, it will just revert back to the previous configuration. It's quite nice. And to save your configuration is literally just a case of pressing the F4 again so that the safe mode is released, and then you're back in the normal mode again. Now, besides the safe mode, I just want to see repaint screen is when you press F5, but that just basically clears the screen, and then it's just like having a nice fresh line again. So this is what it does. So let's just hit F1, F1 again. Then we've got stuff like our home or end buttons, or Control A, Control E. Now this is more or less for if you're busy working with a command. So let's say IP address, I type print, but there's something I forgot that I wanted to add at the beginning of the line. I can just press the home key and it will take me to the beginning of the line, as you can see with my cursor, or you can press the end key to get to the very back of this line. Now we've also got stuff like Control C, which interrupts an action. And this is very useful if you're busy maybe troubleshooting. Let's say you're running a ping from the command line, but you want to stop the ping. This is where you will be using Control C. So if I type ping space 8888, even though I know it's going to fail because I don't have any config on the MikroTik, it will run the ping. And if I want to stop it, I can hit Control C, and that interrupted that action. If you hit Control D, that terminates your session on the MikroTik, which means it disconnects you. And then we have stuff like Control K, Control U, which is just more or less for deleting stuff while you're typing it. It's not often that you use stuff like Control K or Control U, but the options are there. And then you've got stuff like moving between different levels. Now, what does that mean? Well, let's say if I go into IP and I tab, and then I see I can go into address, so I go into address. If I hit enter here, this will now put me in the IP address directory. So now I will only have IP address commands that I can issue from here. So if I F1 this, it's all just IP address. But now I'm statically in that configuration section. I'm not anywhere else. So if I want to go back, it's very similar to Linux almost. If I just want to go up one level, I can press the double dots. and it will just take me to the IP field. And then if I F1, I can see what stuff I can do from IP. And if you want to go back completely to the global level, you can just hit the /, hit enter, and that takes you back to the global level. Now, what I also like about this / command is, let's say you were busy in the IP address section and you wanted to do something like a ping, then you can just type / ping 8888, because that allows you to also issue global commands from a specific sub option that you might be busy working with. Now, with the command line for RouterOS, I want you to think of this as it's very similar to Winbox as well. And what I mean by that is, if I log into something like Winbox, and here I've got Winbox open, if you're going to be configuring something with the IP addresses, it's the same type of way that you're configuring this stuff. So with the command line, let's just go back to global. I go into IP, let's hit enter. With Winbox, you'll click on IP. Let's say we want to configure addresses. I'll click on addresses. With the command line, you'll type address, hit enter. Now we're in that same type of configuration object as with Winbox, just via the command line. So it's really just the same thing that you're doing, just from a different viewpoint, which is really, really awesome. All right, so I think this basically shows you how to navigate around using the command line. Let's actually perform a basic configuration using the command line and having a similar setup to using the default configuration script. So let's get into that now. If I think about the default configuration script, there's a few very specific things that we need to get the MikroTik running. Firstly, we need to identify our WAN port and how we're going to connect that WAN port. Are we going to use DHCP, static IP, or other like triple PoE? In our case, we're going to be using a DHCP client on Ether1 to obtain an IP address from our current home network so that the MikroTik can get internet access out. Now, besides that, we need to also set up a LAN network. We need to set up a DHCP server for the LAN network, and we need to tweak a little bit of settings in the firewall. Specifically, we want to add a NAT rule out to the internet so that our private network, our LAN network, can get internet access out. Like, those are really the main big things that we need to get this working. So let's get back into the global configuration mode. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add that DHCP client to my Ether1 interface. So to do that, I will go into my IP, I'll tab, or I can F1. I know I want to go into DHCP-client, tab it. I know I want to add this, so I'm adding a DHCP client, tabbing, and now we need to set a few things. Now, interface is very important. We need to define this, so you'll type interface equals, and this is also something I didn't mention. These green objects are things that you physically need to add further details in. So it's not really another directory or an action that the MikroTik's performing. It's like a variable that you need to put in information into. So we are now defining an interface. If I tab this, it gives me a list of the possible interfaces. So I know Ether1 is my WAN interface, so I'll paste that there. So I just copy it and paste it by right clicking, and if I tab again, we can now set a few extra options. So I just want to make sure that disabled is no, that the DHCP client is not in an inactive state. I'll also use peer DNS, so I'll say yes. That just means I'll obtain the DNS server from the DHCP, and I'll also use the peer NTP, yes. And then lastly, I will add a default route. For that, I'll specify yes as well. Now I have one long line that I'm running from my global menu or the global configuration. So I'm adding a DHCP client on Ether1. It's not disabled. I am getting the DNS and NTP, and I'm adding a default route. And just for comparison, if I go onto the MikroTik on Winbox, I go into IP, DHCP client, I'm adding a client, same options. I'm defining my interface, I'm using DNS and NTP, and I'm adding a default route. Perfect. So I'll just hit enter, and presto, now my MikroTik should actually be obtaining an IP address. How can I verify that? Well, I can do something like an IP, DHCP-client. If I tab or F1, I can use the print command to see the value of an item's properties. So I'll hit enter, and here it will tell me Ether1, it has DHCP configured, it is using the peer DNS, it is adding a default route, the status is bound, which means it did obtain an IP address, and here we can see what the IP address is, 192.168.1.47/24. Similarly, if I do an IP address print, I can see that this IP address was dynamically assigned in IP addresses on Ether1. Perfect. If I do an IP tab route tab print, now I'm looking at the routing table of the MikroTik. I can see that the default route has been added, and there is my gateway. So in theory, if I run a ping command now, so let's ping Google, ping 8888, I can see that the ping is running and it is successful. So the MikroTik has internet access. Hooray! But no devices that's connecting to it has any internet yet because I haven't added my LAN networks yet. So let's do that now. First thing I know what I want to do is I want to add a bridge. So I'm going to go into interfaces or interface, tab it, bridge, tab, add. So I'm adding a new bridge. Then I can just give the bridge a name. So I'll make this the LAN. And I don't need to add anything else for the bridge in this case. We could enable stuff like VLAN filtering, but since this is just a beginner friendly guide, we're just going to set this up for LAN network. So I will hit enter. And then we need to also just add our ports, our designated LAN ports, and maybe our Wi-Fi adapter or card to this bridge as well. So I'll do an interface bridge add, or interface bridge port add. Now we can define our ports. There's two important objects that we need for this. First thing, we need to set the interface that we want to add to the bridge. So the interface will be equals, and here I can set it for either all the ports, all the dynamic ports, or Ether 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever. But we know that Ether 1 is for the WAN, so we won't use that. So Ether 2, 3, and 4, as well as WLAN 1, I'll assign to the bridge. So what I'll do is add interface equals Ether 2. And then we also just need to define our bridge. So our bridge in this case will be the LAN bridge that we created. I will hit enter. Now we've added Ether 2 to the bridge. And then you see I use the up arrow key to quickly get to the previous issued command. Now I can do the same for Ether 3, up arrow, Ether 4, up arrow, and WLAN 1. So very quickly I added 4 interfaces to a single bridge from the command line. So there's some stuff that you can also, it feels like you just do it a lot quicker when you're doing it from the command line. So we have our bridge, but the bridge is it's just a bridge at the moment. It's not doing any IP addressing. So let's bind an IP to the bridge. So what I might do is go into my IP tab address, because I now want to add an address. I'll add. Now we can specify our address. So what would we like our LAN network to be? Let's make it the same as the default MikroTik range. So 192.168.88.1/24. And the interface I'm going to bind that against is the LAN bridge that I created, which was just named LAN. I'll hit enter. And if I do an IP address print, we'll see that I have added this LAN bridge now, and it has an IP address. Perfect. So we're making a lot of headway. Let's add a DHCP server so that the bridge will issue out IP addresses to any clients that connects to any of the ports that's in the bridge or anything that connects on the WLAN. So I will just do a IP tab, and if I press F1, where are we going to go? Well, we're going to go into our DHCP server now. So we're going to set up a DHCP server. So DHCP-server. If I F1 this, what do we want to do? And this is quite nice from the command line. You can also run the same setup as you could from Winbox. So I can just type setup here and I'll hit enter. And it will actually run me through a whole setup wizard. So we'll ask you, what is the DHCP server interface? For this, it was the LAN bridge. So I'll just type in LAN. You can tab this as well, and it will give you possible options. I'll hit LAN. DHCP address space, so it will take the IP address range that is already defined from IP addresses. So I'm happy with this. It will ask you what the gateway needs to be. So 192.168.88.1, which is correct because it is the MikroTik's LAN IP. What is the address pool going to be? So I might just make this only handout from .20 to .254. And again, I did mention it in previous video, but MikroTik issues the DHCP addresses in reverse. So first IP that gets assigned out is .254, then 253, etc. Let's hit enter. What's your DNS server going to be? So that is the DNS that I obtained from my upstream, but I might just make this 8.8.8.8 and 1.1.1.1. If with that comma, I'm adding an additional attribute, so to speak. I'll hit enter. Now select the least time. So I might just make this 8 hours. And there we go. We've got DHCP configured as well. If I do an IP DHCP-server, if I export this, which is another command, which just basically shows you exactly what commands are currently defined, we can see that there is a DHCP server defined and there is a DHCP network defined. Perfect. So now we should be able to actually obtain IPs automatically from the MikroTik. So I'd actually like to test that. This is going to disconnect our session because I'm going to move the cable from port 5, which is my management interface, to or Ether 2 now. So let me just move the cable. Connection's going to drop. And I'm going to connect to the MikroTik on its new LAN IP address as well. So let's do that. Let me just start a new session up. And I'm going to just quickly remove my static IP on my computer as well before I forget to do that. So let's do that. Remove this statically bound IP that we were using for management. Let's just set it to obtain an IP address automatically so that the DHCP server on the MikroTik can issue us an IP. There I see it's already picked up network 13. If we look at my details, my IP address is 192.168.88.254. Perfect. So we have received an IP address from our MikroTik. Let's see if this is working by connecting to the MikroTik via PuTTY again. So I'll connect to 192.168.88.1 and I'll accept this and let's log in. And there we go, we're back in the MikroTik. Now what I'd like to check from here is the leases that have been sent out. So to see that, we can go into IP DHCP-server again. Then from the server, obviously we can tab or we can F1 and we can look at lease. So I'm going to look at my leases and I'll just print this out. And then this will tell me exactly what IP address was issued out, what MAC address it's associated with, what the host name is that is picked up of the computer that requested the address, what pool it's bound to, and if it's connected. And if I do an IP ARP print, I should be able to see some IPs from there, and there I can see my actual computer that we've been doing this whole lab on. But I'm curious, from my actual computer, if I go onto here, I know that I have an IP address. So if I do IP config, I know I have an IP from the MikroTik, namely 192.168.88.254. And let's just do a /all to see what my DNS is as well. So we can see DNS is 8888 and 1111. Perfect. Do I have internet from my computer? Let's test this. If I ping 8.8.8.8, I do not have any internet access out. Why is that? Well, we haven't added that NAT rule yet. So let's go back onto our MikroTik and let's add a NAT or a masquerade rule out to the internet. So for this, what are we going to do? Hit F1. We know that we want to work with the firewall, but the firewall lives under the IP settings. So we will go IP F1 firewall, tab it and F1. Now we know we want to add a NAT rule, so this is going to be NAT, tab it, F1, and we're going to want to add a new NAT rule. So I'm going to add a new NAT rule, and then we can just use tab from here on out. Now we have many different options. Actually, let's do F1 as well, because as you can see, there is a ton of different options when we're adding stuff like NAT rules or firewall rules, but you don't need to fill in every detail. You need to just add very specific parts of configuration. What's nice about the MikroTik, if you do miss something, like you didn't define the interface or something very specific, it will either give you an error or it will just bring up the thing that you actually need to set for this to work. So let's just add a new NAT rule, and what I will state here is we need to specify a chain. That is always going to be needed. Is it destination? Is it input? Is it output? Is it source? So in our case, this is going to be a source NAT because we want to basically masquerade the IPs of a specific source of traffic that's coming from our network. So we're doing a source NAT. Then we can tab. Now we need to set something like our action. And if we tab it or F1, we can see the different types of stuff we can do. So we can, in essence, do a mask or masquerade. And then the last big thing that I'd recommend is setting what the egress interface is, the outbound interface. So this is going to be out-interface equals, and this is going to be our Ether 1, our WAN port. So what this rule in essence is doing is anything that is leaving out over Ether1 is going to be masqueraded as the Ether1 IP. We can also be a little bit more granular. If we want to, we can set a source address, and then we can set it only from our LAN range so that only the LAN gets internet access out. Or you can define stuff like a source address list if you want to get really fancy. But we're just doing a very basic setup, so let's just NAT traffic out from our LAN, going out over Ether1, hit enter, and that's done. Since we're in the global configuration mode, let's just run a quick export and see all of the config that we have added. So in essence, we have added stuff like DHCP, a bridge, we've added some IP addresses, we've added a firewall NAT rule, and that is really the gist of it. So let's quickly check from my actual computer now, do I have internet access out? My continuous ping has been running and I can see I can ping out to Google. So this is actually pretty good. Now we have set up a very basic, let's say, rule set for your MikroTik, but I just wanted to show you how to do everything from the command line. There's so much more that you can do, obviously, but I'm hoping that you can see that it's not a scary place, and it's actually very easy and quick to navigate through different menus, and it offers a lot of help by just using F1. And if you ever feel stuck and you feel like F1 isn't giving you the details that you want, please get onto the MikroTik documentation. Since I have internet now, I'm going to do that myself now. So I'm going to go into the docs.mikrotik.com. Or it's help.mikrotik.com/docs. And then from here, you should be able to find additional information, especially when it comes to the management tools. We can look at stuff like the command line here, command line interface, and it will give you more options that you can check and see and work around with, and just help you with some of the syntaxes, the hierarchy, all of that wonderful bits and bobs of different things that you maybe want to just figure out. So I highly recommend coming to the documentation if you ever get stuck as well, and I'll put a link for that in the pinned comment. So this is going to be where I'm going to end off the video. I'd like to thank you guys for watching. I appreciate it when you guys view the video. I also very much appreciate the people that help support the channel on Patreon and as YouTube members. I appreciate that so much, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya.